Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Truly Myrtle Podcast. Welcome back for our special summer yarn series. I have got the very fabulous Ethan joining me from his lovely little yarn shop, Get Flocked, down in New Zealand. And he's coming to talk to us all about yarn trends, where he sees the yarn world going over the next little while, where it's been. I think it'll be helpful to know where it's been and where it's going. So welcome, Ethan. It is lovely to have you with me.
Hi.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about
you?
And
be with you.
Yeah, it's good.
Absolutely. So I'm based in Christchurch, New Zealand. Currently, I own a yarn shop called Get Flocked, and I run an online, more technique-based system called the Flock Online, where we focus really on the kind of technical aspects and more principles around knitting and yarn substitution, stuff like that. I have worked for a long time in our industry. We're past my decade anniversary, which is interesting. I work as a designer, as a tech editor, obviously now a yarn shop owner. I've been the creative director for a yarn company. I've done pattern design work for yarn brands, and I've done tech editing for all sorts of people all over the industry. I also love to hand spin. And at the center of all of this is my love centrally of yarn, and specifically fiber and the different sheep breeds and all the different things that it brings to what we have in yarn. And after working for a yarn company, I've been a part of the process of watching yarn get developed literally from sheep to skein on multiple occasions now. So I know quite a bit about what goes on in the industry as far as processing and development and the major construction methods. And I sell yarn, and I've been doing it now pretty consistently for a decade. So I know a lot about what's happening, and I read a lot of the publications, and I'm involved with a lot of designers, so I can kind of get a good feeling for what's going on with stuff usually. But yeah, I think that's where I've been with stuff for a while now.
It's fun. Yeah. I've been talking all summer about yarn, and today I just want to look forward. Yeah. Where do we think yarn is going to go? So I thought you'd be the perfect person to talk about that. But first, should we talk about where yarn has been? Because I think it helps to there have been yarn trends that have happened, and then we can look at, well, where do we think it's going?
We're just going to talk today really openly and honestly about what we've observed over the past. And, it's just what's been going on. We've been seeing a lot of different things that I think have waxed and waned over the years. And I think we're coming to a more medium place. I think certain things are coming back and some things are going to be going by the wayside. Some of that has to do with how we now buy yarn. And I think that's a big thing that we forget to talk about, is that purchasing trends and the motivations behind why we're knitting garments really changes what yarn sells and what gets bought and who is selling it, right? And so therefore where it's coming from. So let's go way, way back. Many, many moons ago, there were no yarn companies. So at the very beginning of all this stuff, guys, essentially what we were doing was collecting various fibers, cleaning them, possibly dyeing them, most likely not, carding them at some wet level, most likely with hand carders at home, spinning, knitting, probably with the grease still in, and then washing and wearing those garments. That probably makes up, if we look at on the timeline of the human history of knitting, that probably makes up the majority of the time of how human knitting has happened. Now, we all know that an industrial revolution occurred in the 1900s. And when that happened, spinning of all sorts, especially cotton and wool, really got revolutionized. And hand spinning and other very, very time-consuming aspects of it kind of went out the window. And then we start getting more standardized, refined yarns. But then we start running into the things about where can you get enough fiber from in order to produce them? And we start getting into those global shipping markets that exist already that time point. I just want to be clear with everyone. This is not a recent thing. The shipping of raw fiber to different locations to be spun and processed, and the local region not having good access to that fiber and instead purchasing it back as a finished good later, is a really common long-term thing, especially in the New Zealand region. And globally, it's just been like that. Spinning processing got really big in the New England region of America and in the Yorkshire region in the UK. And that was pretty much it for a long time. Then you did have the rise of Indian cotton mills and other things, and various regional processors came about. Some finished good processing for things like the New Zealand strong wool industry for our carpet manufacturing and especially during the World Wars, blankets and garments for the war industry were largely produced here. But again, not like huge discussion and not huge amounts of records about what was going on with hand knitting yarn during those time periods and how many mills were dedicated to just making hand knitting yarn. Some people, there's a researcher named Marina Shearer, have reverse engineered and kind of pieced together what we think is happening based on the stuff that survives, which are stuff like these pamphlets, because the yarn has already been knitted and used and is possibly now sitting in an op shop with a label in it, so it looks like a made garment, but it actually was from a pattern that came with a label attached to it in one of these books. And so it looks like a finished thing, so we don't identify it as a hand knit, but it's actually like something from one of these books. So really good effort has been done around reverse engineering what yarn trends in the like more distant past were like by using what patterns were around. Now, the good news is, I remember the year of our Lord 2004 when Ravelry came back into our lives. And I remember when you used to have to request access. I don't know who else here had a like request access and got assigned a number, because that's how it worked back in the day. You had to email them or have someone that you knew who had Ravelry could send you an invite at one point as well. So Ravelry went through a bunch of permutations until it became the more open source, if now kind of decrepit, should we say, pattern resource that it is. And that has a big effect on the yarn market. And it is actually important to talk about this as part of it. So Ravelry and hand-dyed yarn kind of came about at the same time. I would say hand-dyed yarns were already coming back. There weren't as many large-scale commercial producers for hand knitting yarn or knitting specific shops scattered about globally or here in New Zealand at that time period. I would say color selection especially was leaving a lot to be desired in commercially dyed yarns. And a lot of mills had been closing or downsizing, but the sticking point in every commercial mill, and this is important to understand, is not the milling side of it. Most mills can far produce way more yarn than they could ever dye in a day. The problem is dyeing takes roughly 24 hours per color of whatever volume you can dye. And so it takes time to do it. And that's the major sticking point. And so you end up with limited color palettes and wholesale yarn collections, especially if they're trying to produce at reasonable levels. And then you have that flip side effect where producing bare yarn that's undyed is quite time and cost effective. And so therefore you start having companies like Chester's and Laxton's and Lasco opening up and specializing more in naked skeins of yarn, undyed skeins for people to dye on. And the same thing happened here in New Zealand with skeins and its production, and all of those factors happening at once, and Ravelry coming back and dyes from companies like Dharma becoming more commercially available, these acid fixing dyes that only need citric acid or a little bit of vinegar to be fixed. And you kind of have the milieu that birthed the yarn market in the indie dyer. And some of those at the very early beginning days grew and became really established brands. There are obviously notable international examples who by 2008 were well entrenched in producing sweater quantities of yarn on a regular basis and had established color palettes. So internationally, you're looking kind of at Canis Lavalley, Cake Yarn in Australia, Madeline Tosh in America definitely had a huge impact early. Sweet Georgia fibers, and those sorts of dyers, probably here as well, Happy Go Knitty is worth mentioning at that same time period, coming in and starting to really establish a dyeing style.
And Fibre Specs in the UK. I know there was one in the UK.
Yes, Fibre
Skein Queen.
Yeah,
there are a few over there as well.
Queen, So we had that kind of birth of the hand-dyed yarn company, not just the indie or hand dyer. And you really start to see that the differentiation in dye style and color and technique and selection starts to make a difference. A lot of those individuals as well had market-specific, if not custom yarns that they were solely using and dyeing on as well, which is really important. And it is important to note to everybody who is watching this that the majority of hand-dyed yarn in the world is sourced from a common pool of hand-dyed yarn from chesters and wool to dye for. So pretty much the vast majority of dyers globally are working on yarn sourced from a singular place. So the majority of yarns that most hand dyers are using are drawn from a common pool. And bearing in mind, hand-dyed yarn companies do tend to have more custom spun bases, and more established dyers will have custom spun bases. But if you sit there and look at the construction of the yarns and the fiber quantity and qualities inside of it, you can essentially work out which dyers are working with which bases and then interchange them like that. There's also only so many dye companies in the world, and most people are working from those dyes. So that's where the differentiation in hand dyeing now at this moment has started to become more artistic and technical, I would say. And people are starting to seek out those more value forward bases that are offering high reward for the investment into them. And, I think that that's kind of where we need to start is over the last 20 years, I would say there was a slow inclining boom of hand-dyed yarn overall that leveled off and now is going to, I think, come down and still stay very relevant inside of the industry for a wide variety of reasons. There will always be people exploring and experiencing knitting for the first time, and those yarns at the beginning of our knitting timelines are always going to be really attractive and enjoyable to work with. And the good news is, because the quality overall, I would say, of hand-dyed yarn selected for shops has improved, I would say that people are making garments now that they're going to really love over time. And let's be very honest, a lot of people in the earlier phases of the dyeing eras were experimenting and growing and learning. And some of the outcomes that they produced were not particularly desirable. I think I have been known to describe them as clown pants in the past. And I'm okay with that description, because some of them, in some of these are skeins that I have proudly purchased, indeed do upon reflection resemble clown pants, and not in a good way. So it's important to remember, there was that timeline of hand-dyed yarn, but now, and bearing in mind, I don't go to shows, I don't go to other shops, so I only see the things that I pick for myself to work with. I'm seeing, here in New Zealand especially, there are some dyers who have really created a brand and an image and an idea for themselves and have crafted this whole way of dyeing that is very evocative and interesting, or they have extremely specialized on selecting bases that no one else carries around them. And I've got my common list of people that I think about all the time that I always talk about. And, it's definitely Yarn Floozy, Helene at Happy Go Knitty, especially if you're looking for a big, subtle, nuanced palette that you can actually use for color work. She provides that. Julie at Harney Hoolies for sure produces some really beautiful work, and probably Bonnie at Union Fiber, who I adore her fiber and her yarn. But they're all telling very unique color stories with what they're doing. And I think that sort of hand dyeing is going to endure. So I think the regionally specific hand dyers who have invested a lot in crafting a brand and a skill and a dye style, I think they're going to endure and continue to offer really great value inside of their spaces. There are some things in hand-dyed yarn that I think are about to go by the wayside. And the number one culprit is going to be something I really like, and I know it's something you really like, and we've both designed and knit with it quite a bit in the past. And that's definitely going to be the very, very high-priced yarns. So this guy here is some Labiana May Cashmerino. It's gorgeous. It's a lovely base, a nice round clump, beautiful ply construction, bright color, Flora Morganite, super, super bright. Would retail at $70 a skein in New Zealand. And it's gorgeous. It's lovely. But as I said, we have local regional hand dyers here that can offer a much better value proposition, I think, than something like this. And it is a thing to note that this is hand dyed in the middle of downtown Paris. And hand dyeing inside of large cities is very expensive because it takes up a lot of space and resources and staff, and hand dyeing is very labor intensive. And all of those costs do impact the cost of the final skein. And I just want to contrast it with something also from Europe. And this is something that I think is going to grow and stay. So I think these smaller, more independent, but still hand-dyed brands, this is Dark Omen yarn.
Dark Omen. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So only myself and Stephen and Penelope stock Dark Omen. It's dyed by a man that I know named Francesco, and he has a beautiful color sense. I discovered it while shopping on the Stephen and Penelope website for my Mystery Knit Along kit because I am a sucker for punishment. And I really fell in love with the colors, and some of the names were just great, and I thought it would really appeal. And it comes in at a reasonable price point into this market. It is an imported, beautiful base, but he's having it spun and milled locally in Italy, so his costs on it are lower. And as people who I think, like Francesco, are positioned to take advantage of their local milling offerings and possibly lower overheads because of where they're located regionally, and that proximity to shipping hubs, right? And I know that sounds so boring to talk about, guys, but it is actually really important because when you've got yarn companies in Europe, their shipping availability is just much easier because they're close to each other and getting stuff from point A to B. And so the costs don't add up quite as quickly, and the value that comes out of it is really, really high. So my prediction for hand-dyed yarn is definitely these high-value independent dyers. So find ones that are local to you. Look at your local yarn shops. Most likely your local yarn shops are going to be stocking imported hand-dyed bases, not local hand dyers, because it is very hard. And I just want to be honest, for yarn shop owners everywhere today, it's very challenging to make a margin on hand-dyed yarn for hand dyers. They work very, very hard at what they do, but it is easier as a yarn shop owner to find that difference in margin through importing than it is sourcing locally. It is something to note. There is another thing in hand-dyed yarn that I have really loved over the past several years, but as I mentioned, I've really gotten into hand spinning, and I actually, I should probably not grab it out, but I think that yarn like this, unfortunately, is going to be something that is definitely much lighter in our yarn diet overall than it ever was previously. This is spin cycle dyed in the wool, and the colorway is Stay Ready. And I picked this colorway because I think it's super effective and really interesting and shows off what they do very, very well. So unlike a Zauberball or many other things, they hand dye the top in this in order to produce essentially a randomized elongated fractal ply. So if you hand spin, we all know you can make fractals by spinning two different ratios and applying them together. It's how it works. And you can essentially randomize a fractal by splitting a braid in half that's been hand dyed and spinning from two ends, and you'll get a randomized fractal. And that's what they're doing. And it's really, really clever. And doing it in a mechanized way to make it mass produced is incredibly brilliant. And they've worked out and solved so many challenges and problems along the way. But the reality is, it's double the work basically to make this as anything else. And milling yarn is already quite labor intensive. And those of us who hand spin can tell you it's not necessarily the world's fastest way to make a skein of yarn for your project. But I will say that the value proposition of these yarns as hand spinning continues to rise. And now that we have better spinning wheels, I have an Ashford Joy 2, and I will say learning to spin on an Ashford Joy 2 costs approximately 10 of these skeins of yarn, for example, and is 1,000 times easier than learning to spin on any other wheel I've ever tried. The controls are much simpler and easier to work with. Sorry, French Bulldog.
That's right. So you're saying it's easier entry point into the market of spinning. Well, and I'm seeing spinning on the rise. There's definitely more. You see, the other thing I see that
coming in.
Yeah, well, the other thing I see going along with all of this that sort of punctuates things is also, I mean, when we talk about Ravelry right in the beginning, I was in the UK at the time during the crash, and all of a sudden everybody needed to make everything. It was a real resurgence. And so although Ravelry was ticking along, all of a sudden, boom, make, do, and mend just became a big thing. I'm seeing that happen again
Yeah.
now. And so there's this whole resurgence in the craft industry because there's some need to just hold on to something and make it. It must be a human thing. And that includes spinning then.
I mean, yeah, and I would say it includes spinning, and the spinning meets the value of what you're producing there with the hand spinning as high, if not higher than this, for the person making it and using it. And while I really love Spin Cycle and I've designed with it a bunch in the past, I just think that it's hard when the value proposition of this is much lower than the value proposition of all the things that I'm about to show you, which are the representation of where I think yarn trends are heading. And I'm also wearing what I think yarn trends are definitely going to continue to head towards. So while I love Spin Cycle, and I think people will still use it, I just don't think we're going to see it in every color work yoke going forward. I think there are other options. And I also think that now what I am noting is more people are coming in to knit garments like this and garments like what you're wearing that they can wear in day-to-day life that aren't necessarily a bright, bold color work yoke. People are coming in to make high quality, beautiful basics because that's the thing that they are now lacking in their wardrobe. The good news with kind of the rise of the funky fashion that's happened at the moment is if you want to go get a ridiculous statement sweater knit in any sort of style, they exist now. They're out there. Go grab one. However, if you want to go and find a really beautiful basic that is well crafted and drafted and thought for your body and shaped in a way that's going to really make it worth the money that you're going to spend on it, bearing in mind, I recently looked at the knitwear collection from the Row, which I believe started at $3,200 American for a merino oversized jumper.
Crumbs.
And yeah, I was really thinking about this because we actually have the ability as knitters to make very high fashion pieces or very minimalist pieces or anything that you could possibly want for your wardrobe. And the great thing is commercially produced yarn, which I think is what is going to be on the rise for the next 10 to 20 years, breed specific, commercially produced.
So explain to people who are unfamiliar with what breed specific means. Tell them what you mean by that.
So breed specific yarns are when we have a yarn where the fiber that has gone into it is sourced from breed specific sheep that have been selected for the unique characteristics that their fiber qualities bring to the product. So many of the sheep that we have today are merino crosses. Many of the sheep that we have today are merino Corriedale throwback or comeback crosses that eventually turn into other sheep breeds. And that is important to note because that's kind of the basis of the global fiber industry. But this yarn, for example, is Cumbria worsted. And while it has merino in it, it also has brown nasham and mohair. So these are three breed-specific products that have gone into this. A breed-specific goat hair, a mohair goat, a breed-specific sheep in the form of the merino, and a second breed-specific sheep in the form of the nasham. Now, a nasham sheep has a deep brown fiber that has a little bit of a rust tinge to it. It's also a slightly shorter fiber, so it produces more of a halo in warmth that can cause pilling over the beginning life of a garment, but eventually over time will create an internal felted structure and an exterior smooth glossy structure once you're finished with the excess pilling. So that's one of the beautiful things about using breed-specific yarns is we know what's going to happen with the fiber as it's worn because we know what that fiber does over time and we know what that sheep is like historically. And it adds value and depth to the yarn. Cameras are not necessarily the best thing at capturing what's going on with this yarn, but you can see how the light scintillates across the three different fibers at a slightly different ratio, creating a yarn that is more than the sum of its parts. And this is also the specialty of this particular yarn brand, which isn't just using breed-specific fibers and sourced things, but the fiber company prides itself on luxury, perfect blends that create balanced, nuanced yarns with incredible finished results. One of their other really standout products is absolutely Erin Moore Light. It's a DK weight woolen spun yarn made of merino, silk, and cashmere. And you can see that, again, it's been carefully dyed and selected with that tweed appearance, where it's a tone on tone on tone tweed, where the same shade of blue is applied to different fibers, producing varied results. And then woolen spun in a 2-ply construction DK weight. So these are two beautiful specialty garment yarns that are going to produce a really unique final fabric outcome that you can't get from anything else. And these are not bases that hand dyers have access to be spun in vast, vast quantities to produce breed-specific, fiber-specific bases. The last one I'm going to show you from them is something that, again, would be challenging to acquire for anyone but a large-scale yarn company. This is the incomparable Road to China Light. It is a sport weight worsted spun yarn. It's a blend of cashmere, camel, silk, and baby alpaca, or as I like to say, everything soft is not a sheep.
Yeah, I made a hat with that. It's just divine. I designed a little hat right back in the day, Quebec on the cheek, and it's just, I thought it had everything in it but gold.
Yeah, it is an absolutely amazing thing. And so
divine.
These fiber blends have been around for a great amount of time from a really reputable company. We know what they're going to be like. They offer huge amounts of value for what you're putting into them. There is thought and planning and everything that has gone into them. Massive amounts of pattern support already exist for them. And I think these tried and trusted, affordable luxury yarns, maybe not that.
Yeah, no, that's why I did a little hat.
Affordable luxury yarns.
They are beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, I have actually got some for a cardigan, but I haven't done it.
And you can't escape it. The other thing that I do really think is coming, and is nowhere near peak. So that's what I'm wearing right now, for one thing. So the mohair held double trend is going nowhere fast, except for more mohair. I think more unique ways of using it, more thought process around it, and honestly, maybe just more better basics out of it over time.
Do you
I think one of the great things...
Yeah, I was just asking you a question, but do you think that, that we've got the brushed mohair and then we have the very silky mohair. So are you seeing, I don't think we've had a rise of the silky mohair yet either. I feel like that's another, it's in that Cumbria. And
I think Cumbria is definitely going to be the beginning of it. I think the silky mohair is going to require some adaptations to the way that we knit and approach things. And I actually have a strange sensation that the silky mohair and the fluffy mohair together might be a next big trend, actually. I think double mohair that way, not just 2 strands of mohair held together, is going to be the big thing. I do think these tone-on-tone, perfectly matched yarn blends from big scale producers that create these super saturated, rich, comfortable fabrics are going to keep rising. We're definitely seeing the Europeans who are really investing back into yarn production locally. So this is Euless. It's a beautiful woolen spun sport weight yarn. This color is called eucalyptus. It's heathered and textured. It's made out of organic merino des Alpes combined with black organic Portuguese merino. It is a absolute stunner to knit with. Produces a lightweight, rich, springy, round fabric. It also has a running range of coordinates on a silk mohair with a tiny amount of wool added to it. That is Berenice.
Just
and
beautiful.
You can see this one has a little bit of wool in it as well. And just how more closely and richly the shades align, and how that mulberry silk core is going to bring out those lighter, brighter pops in that so wonderfully. And I think that this sort of really well-engineered, well-thought-out, quite specific yarn is the future. And it takes a long time to develop the sort of flavor and feel for mixing these yarns together yourself. But the great news is that I can say is the yarn companies are starting to make it really, really easy. And they're producing specific coordinates that go together perfectly. Issayer is obviously the reigning king, queen, however we want to phrase it, of this particular approach to knitting. I don't think anybody is ever going to have such an understanding of the way to produce yarn ranges that are completely interchangeable across weight to create a variety of different fabric effects that work in a variety of different patterns, as well as they do. And it's clearly an experience thing. This is a sayer that I'm wearing right now. Their silk mohair is undoubtedly one of the softest, nicest ones I have ever worked with. And their entire product range is centered on quality, reproducibility, and really excellent pattern support with just a gorgeous ability to create the fabrics that you want for every single garment you're making. It's that complete freedom of choice. Once a knitter starts to understand gauge intention, then the next step is really understanding that fabric and fiber combination situation. And there's essentially two ends of the spectrum here of how you do it. On the one end is the essayer. Here are all of the different strands. You put them together and block it, and you make the final fabric that you want with full control over what that outcome is. And then there is the Fiber Co. approach, which is I'm going to take incredibly precious ingredients that you couldn't add together yourself and bring them together to make a perfect thing that will work in all of these different garments for you like this. And I think that this is representing the new polarity of choice inside of what's going on with knitting. And it's going to be more about what garment you're making over time. And I do honestly just see a continued upward trajectory of more people knitting and crocheting and making their own clothes.
And not just that, though,
I don't think it's
Ethan. I think it's
down.
just, and I don't think it's just about making clothes. I think it's about being very, very clear about what you're making. We're getting, the knitters are becoming, we've had a big learning curve in the time that I've been around and watching knitters, where I feel like we've regained a lot of old skills and grown them. And we're quite fussy now about what we want, and rightly so, but we're getting to be and I think we're creating, I see a desire for a polish, for a polish to our garments. Not that they're all really formal, but that we have very clear expectations and we want them to be good.
I've noticed from looking at a lot of the Danish designers and a lot of the things that what people are saying back to me is what I see and what I design personally as a designer, what I love making is basics. Really elevated, thoughtful, detail-oriented classics. And the return of that has been really freeing, I think, for a lot of us. What you're saying is exactly what I've been noticing. So this is, by the way, just what I have at home in my office to talk about yarn trends with. But this is an example of exactly what you're talking about. So when I had the other Berenice combination up in my hand, it would give it a beautiful rustic elegance to it. We're also seeing these highly sophisticated bases starting to come back. So this is a 5-ply construction, fingering weight, 90% merino, 10% silk yarn on top. It's called Albertine. And there's that Berenice again in its coordinating color. And you can see that this is going to produce a rich, sophisticated, layered fabric, almost with the effect of what you're doing with paint, where you're putting a color down underneath to build, and then we're glazing over top of it to craft that final color. And I think that color play in the commercially dyed yarns, as their color palettes become broader and richer and more nuanced and detailed over time, which I do think was inspired a lot by some of the hand-dyed yarn colors that you see. I don't believe that we would have gotten to this indescribable number of shades. Like before, it was very easy to go into a yarn shop and purchase a commercially dyed yarn and say, I want sage green. Where now if you came into my shop and you said, I wanted coral, well, which coral do you want?
Amazing choice.
Shades, but I have shades of coral so nuanced that I could take you all the way from, a piece that you find on the beach at sunrise to 3 pieces at sunset saturated in a blue ocean like this, right? And it's incredible actually to be experiencing, because you can see how it is lighting up in knitters as they are gaining that control. I like the C word a lot. I know a lot of people don't, but as knitters are starting to gain further and further control over the outcomes of what they're making, that joy around making that ability to seek out, and we're starting to also regain that ability to articulate what we want. I think that's the other big thing. It's not just that we're getting better at making things, but we're getting better at saying what we actually want out of something in the process, and that's leading to better outcomes. And it really did, like, and I want to be clear, the hand-dyed yarn, the rise of the original hand-dyed yarn thing freed up people's minds, but it did also create certain limitations that led to certain things becoming standardized inside of the industry that are being broken out of because of the regional availability of yarns in other areas, right? The reason that the quote unquote knitting revolution of going back to making polished everyday basics is coming from Denmark is because Denmark retained its yarn companies. And so as this sort of thing started to happen and people were making again, these are the yarns that were regionally available there more than hand-dyed yarns. And as these companies stepped into the market and modernized along with Ravelry designers, that's why we're getting these nuanced and specific shades. It's very sensible that that would have then spread into other European countries like, Sweden, et cetera, France, all of them, Italy, collecting and kind of growing as it goes through those regions, and that it will take time to spread overall to other countries to have this kind of rebirth of commercially dyed, high quality local yarns. And I think that the Danes are going to remain ahead for a long time because they have a lot of investment into this already, and they're producing beautiful stuff, quite frankly, that is just a joy to work with. And part of a high fiber diet is experiencing and exploring lots of different things. I find in my knitting, I can't speak for you, Libby, but I need to have more than one project with more than one type of yarn on the go at a time to be feeling really creative and motivated. The tactile nature of what we're doing is sometimes undersold by myself as somebody who holds himself to like trying to get one project done and finish and get a design out. And it's actually not necessarily the most productive. So why do I think yarn trends are heading this way? My final argument is because I think, and I could be wrong, but I think people want to start making garments like this. And I think that these are the next things that are coming back, is going to be these kind of big, beautiful statement
magnificent
piece, color work items. Yeah. And I think that this sort of knitting combined with the gorgeous basics like this is going to be the new thing going forward.
So those gorgeous basics, I think there's always going to be a place for an accessory to throw around. And I see that as still being something that the hand dyers can really play into. I always have this leaning where I do want some beautiful basics, but I also love that feminizing thing. So the little details and the prettiness and things like that go with it. And so for me, sometimes that has been achieved by grabbing different kinds of yarns and using those together in one project. So you might have a little lace of something, a little frill of something else. So what you're saying overall, I think, is that we've seen this incredible rise of hand dye. People have learned an awful lot through that process. There are limitations to the kind of bases that they're able to get hold of, and that probably won't change.
Not just the bases, no, and also the quantity of yarn that can be dyed. Especially if you're thinking about making oversized garments or which do have a kind of polished elegance to them, or if you want to make anything that takes more than 3 skeins. Can be quite challenging, and getting precisely matched yarn out of hand dyers is difficult, and quite frankly, alternating skeins when you want to take your knitting around with you is annoying. There
are limitations
that don't need to be there.
So that perhaps the hand dyers that have really strong design element to their work will be ones that will continue to rise, will continue. So there's something in that, I think.
The ones who more are artists, and I think less than those. Like, there are people who approach this as art, and I think they will always have a big place in the industry. There are people who approach this with a kind of scientific repeatability side of things, who produce nuance that is not available from commercially dyed palettes. I think they will always have a place. I think those are going to be the two that you'll see. And frankly, it's always going to get progressively more expensive and tedious to produce, but I think self-striping soft yarn it's one of those things that is super joyful to work with, that the commercially dyed self-striping sock yarns just do not have the same character that the hand-dyed ones do. And
No.
I wish I could describe it better, but the hand-dyed ones are superior for whatever reason.
So there's going to be a place. There's still a place.
Yeah.
But that, to me, that feels really exciting. I feel very excited about the prospect. I mean, you know, that whole idea that be you. I see it as just do you, man.
Yeah.
Just go hard and do the bit, you know, your thing. I feel like that is quite an exciting prospect, so that you can really have your voice coming through in your yarn. Yeah, it's what people, I think, will love.
It is really going to be about communicating personal style going forward. And I think too that like we're definitely seeing people who are engaging with things like Wardrobe TOOLBOX and the Flock Online taking much bigger steps into making wardrobes for themselves that actually fit the way they want them to, and actually are in the fabrics that they want. So over time, a bigger diversity and availability of yarn only benefits everybody.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the big things is, and I will say at my shop at Get Flocked, I strive to have a broad and diverse selection. It is often overwhelming, I think, the first time you walk into the shop, because there's a lot of yarn now. But this is just the beginning, because there are still so many yarns that all of you have yet to try.
Yeah.
And so we're going to keep working on that over time.
Yeah. And so for the commercial yarn front, I think that is equally as exciting, because I can see this huge range of colors coming, really sophisticated colors, beautiful palettes developing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I love the idea that you talked about with this polarity between having a yarn that is given to you and provides you with this, all these beautiful, you know, everything but gold put into it.
Yeah.
And then the idea of just building your own fabric. And for someone that's really interested in yarn and really wanting to know more and perhaps getting into spinning, the idea of building your own fabric is fantastic. That's pretty fantastic.
And it gives you, the knitter, more idea over time. Each time you do that, you're going to actually gain additional little bits of knowledge that add up over time to bigger and bigger things. And I think that's one of the situations that can be oftentimes underrated, is that you actually learn a lot through those sorts of trials and errors, for sure.
Oh, it's fun. I feel like the future is exciting. I'm looking forward to all this yarn. It'll be so good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And
you're so welcome.
Wrapping up our series all about yarn, looking forward, where are we going to be going with it and what to expect. So keep your eyes peeled, folks.
I think the future is yarn bright. Yeah, absolutely.
Good things coming. All right, Ethan. Well, thank you so much. We will see you again soon. Have a lovely, lovely day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, bye.